hima, and I've been practicing that word. I don't know if I'm saying it right. Um, Bara hima, which are supposed to represent Indian philosophers, from what I understand, or that's at least one of the theories out there. And the Indian philosopher influence on Ibn al-Rawandi is inferred by the presence of the Barahima in the Zumurud, who present a voice for the primacy of the human intellect against prophecy. What are your thoughts on that? I know, as you mentioned throughout our discussion, you released the book in 1999, and quite a bit of information came out that could have possibly changed your views. Do you see any link between the Barahima and Indian philosophy, or is the argument that Ibn al-Rawandi himself is the creator of this term holds more credence?
So let's go again to the bigger picture
Okay.
and how close we can make the Islamic world. My assumption is that the early 8th, 9th century, probably also other centuries, but 7th, 8th, 9th century, Muslims travel, conquer, meet, discover the lands around them. And they have contacts. And since Arabic becomes the common language, they have contacts, they discuss, they listen. People don't like nowadays the word influence, but let's use the word impact and discovery. And then discover the world around them. The big question about the Barahima came with the quotations of Ibn Arawandi. Ibn Arawandi, the issue of the free thought of Ibn Arawandi began with quotations of his work that were published by Krauss, in which, as in Al Maturidi, Ibn Arawandi says, it's not what I say, it's what he says. But probably that's a trick of how to present things. And he says, I don't say it. The Barahima say so and so, say that God gave humans the intellect and that should be enough. And people have argued that Ibn Arawandi is inventing him just to cover his back, and B, there weren't enough contacts with India, and we don't have any Brahmans who express these ideas.
Mm.
When I came across Al-Muqammas, the text of Al-Muqammas cites the Barahima, saying the same things. He is as early as Ibn Arawandi, perhaps even earlier. He may be quoting Abu Isa al-Warraq, or he may be quoting someone else. We don't know. But he is familiar with the Barahima doing this kind of thing. And he is also someone who we know from other references in his work was probably interested in Indian religion. Now, people travel to India. I don't know about him or about Ibn Arawandi but people travel to India for business to buy spices. They met Indians. So my own belief was that the Barahima reflect something very serious in the discussions between Muslims and not just Brahmins, but Indians, Hindu, whatever. And I presented the argument, and it was accepted by some and very sharply rejected by others. The late Calder, for example, thought that it was a ridiculous presentation. And I pull my shoulders and say, I still think it's true, but I can't prove it.
I mean, just acknowledging no, go ahead, sorry.
But I'm not able to read Sanskrit. A few years ago, a young Chinese scholar called Dong Xiuan, who can read Chinese and who can read these texts, found the exact parallel positions in Indian texts, in Chinese translations of Buddhist texts.
Mm,
And he also found parallels between the way other aspects of Islamic theology, like their atomistic thought, is reflected in Buddhist religion. And I
mm,
think his uh, uh, presentation in his argumentation that looks at the Arabic text, at the Hebrew text, and the Chinese text, I think this clenches the argument that these were the Bara hima in some way reflects contacts with real Indian people. I cannot say more precisely than that.
and
Who present in in meeting with the Muslims, they present the argument that prophecy is not something that is not a tool that God would use,
except for once.
except for once with the first creation of human being, by installing in the first creation of the first human being, installing in we would say today, his or hers brain, the gift of thinking alone.
Mm. Either whichever side of the debate the ball rests on, I just find the whole concept of the Barahima very interesting. I remember reading in the introduction of a work of Al-Jahi's, some translated writings of his. In the introduction, it mentioned that from the ninth/10th century moving forward, aspects of Indian culture were incorporated into Arabic culture. And I was just wondering, how is that possible? I just don't see Indians popping up in what I've been reading. But then when I started reading your book and on the topic of Barahima, it goes over debates or discussions or what Muslim scholars have written about what they know of Indian religions or having contact with Hindus and such. So I just find the whole concept very interesting.
Can I add just something that seems to be going sideways, but I think is very important? When we think of philosophy, we can say, okay, we can't imagine Indians sitting in Buddhists, Indians, Hindus sitting in Baghdad and discussing with. I think it's a problem of our imagination,
Mhm.
because when we stop speaking about philosophy and we begin to speak about economy, in the Cairo Geniza, in the collection of manuscripts that were found in Cairo, there are hundreds and thousands of documents relating to the commerce between Arabic Muslim lands and India. Shlomo Dov Goitain had collected them to what he began to call the India book, which was then published by his successors and students. There are thousands of documents of contacts of people who moved to India, traded with India, married in India, stayed there, had children, came back with these children.
Mm.
So why would we think that in the evening they did not discuss theology?
I guess because of the Arabic cultural sphere. When you think of Arabic, again, not all of these people were Arabs, but they spoke Arabic. And so you get the idea, the present centeredness of today, that everybody back then were Arabs. So when you start seeing Persians, Turks, and again, I've only been looking into Muslim Islamic history for the last 8 years. So everything for me is constantly developing. But when I start seeing Turks and Persians and Indians and Abyssinians in a place that I had understood to only be consist of Arabs and Arab speaking people, I just find it mind blowing. Just to have that new layer of information added on to what you had previously thought.
It's the beauty of the picture, and I think its richness. It's the fabric of society is ethnologically very rich, religiously very rich. And we didn't mention, we are speaking about the elites and philosophers, and I mentioned trade. We should also mention slavery.
Mm,
People bought slaves from all this country, and they bought Slavs, and they bought people from Abyssinia and from India, and they bought them as children, and not only as children. Some of these people became poets when they were released, or were even as slaves. Some of them read Arabic, read philosophy. We have to think of all these people as people who contribute to the culture of this period.
Definitely, definitely. And not to, like you said, we're